Okay, welcome to the Nick and Joe Show, folks. My name's Nick. He's Joseph. I'm in Sioux Lookout. He is in Ottawa. And yet, through the miracle of modern communication, it looks like we're sitting beside each other. Well, kind of. I love that background, by the way.
Oh, you love my virtual den?
You know something?
Am
It's
I
the
supposed to say
library
that? Am
idea.
I really supposed to reveal it? Like, once you started saying, I love that background, right away the gig was up. I had to admit it.
I was going to say I love that the look of the library because I know you're a very well-read man, and there's nothing I think that signifies that more than a bookcase full of books and not just coloring books. I mean, books of classics, uh,
No,
everything from you name it, famous playwrights, Shakespeare, Churchill, all the ancient philosophers, that kind of stuff.
now, how do you even know that those are classical books in the background?
Because I know you, Joseph, and you wouldn't read
Uh,
anything else.
well, that I certainly would. I'm a Tom. I was a Tom Clancy fan. I
Yeah, then he died.
sorry, not wrote. I read the books that he actually wrote, not the ones that are still being written under his name by other people.
Right. Which aren't
Um, uh,
nearly as good.
I was a real Ian Fleming fan. I read all of the James Bond books, but the originals written by Ian Fleming, which, by the way, separate topic altogether, not on
Right.
our list of topics tonight, but could
It's not.
very easly be. And that is that the Ian Fleming books now, apparently, I'm led to believe, are being re-edited in order to take any racial
Oh, you
um,
gotta be kidding.
um, uh, characteristics, stereotypes, or anything out of the books. And my understanding, I've heard that these are not the only books that are going through this process. And Nick, I was talking to somebody the other day about this, and they were pointing out to me that now with artificial intelligence and the popularity of ebooks, it's really easy to do that, and you could purchase an ebook. I have lots of books in my Kindle library
Right.
that are just electronic, so that I could carry a whole library around with me in my little tablet.
Right.
And every now and then, when there's something that's corrected in the book, an editing problem or whatever, I'll get a little notice saying update your book. Now you could put the settings so that the updates will occur automatically. And the thing is that once you do that, then it's very possible for somebody to go and just go into the electronic file, which is in the cloud, wherever that
Right.
is, uh, and 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 edit the books, and then it changes everywhere that electronic book has been purchased or borrowed or downloaded or anything like that. So it's a very easy process, and the fact that this is starting to happen is it's really troubling. And I will say this, Nick, I do understand the motivation in doing it. In other words, there are some very unhappy, unfortunate stereotypes and language that are used with respect to other people, etc. But in the context of the time and the place, they were appropriate or acceptable, I should say, not necessarily appropriate.
Right.
And as somebody who has spent some time, not in a formal sense, but I appreciate classical literature, and so I always appreciate the context of what's being written, what I'm reading.
Right.
I don't want it to be whitewashed. When I read, for instance, To Kill a Mockingbird,
Right.
okay, or when my kids read To Kill a Mockingbird and they had questions about the racial epithets that were used in that particular book,
Right.
it was a teaching moment. I don't want to see it whitewashed, but I'm led to believe that that's happening more and more now, and it's really unfortunate because you miss the opportunity to really have a frank discussion amongst yourselves and with your students or your kids about what is acceptable and what is not acceptable and why people thought that way or talked that way in that time and place.
Right.
Mark Twain books, for instance, okay, Huckleberry Finn. Um, it, it, you lose that opportunity, but it's equally dangerous when you think about it because while I've said I kind of understand and maybe I would even defend the motivation, not the action, but the motivation behind the action. Okay, what's to be said for the same practice being employed in order to hide something or to do what they used to do in the old Soviet Union? You know, when a communist leader fell out of favor, they'd find a way to airbrush him out of the pictures
Like he never existed.
like he never even existed, you know?
That's right.
Okay, so you could find still old pictures of this poor communist leader, okay, Bolshevik leader, who was popular at one point in time, standing beside Lenin. But then when Stalin came into power, yeah, we'll just take him out of the picture altogether.
Yeah, the last one was him tied to a stake about to be executed.
It's, it's you know, it's. I was we had relatives over this weekend and adult kids, and we were talking about this stuff, and I said, you know, there's the old saying with that song, right? Sometimes you have to be cruel to be kind.
Yep.
It's kind of a little bit like that, you know. You have to be able to face squarely the the sins of our fathers, if I want to use that term, right? Not whitewash it as though it never occurred, because then you never learn anything.
Well, you'd end up repeating the same mistakes they made. And I think I'm not surprised. In a way, I'm not surprised to hear this. They've been doing it with our history in general, excuse me, for quite a while, and we've been railing about it, rewriting, North American history, um, just in all kinds of aspects. And when you read the classics, whether it be To Kill a Mockingbird or War and Peace, or you pick the book, I mean, look how many times the Bible has been revised in order to make the language more palatable. Okay. I don't like that because, first of all, it assumes you can't figure it out on your own. Like from a Christian point of view, I like the Dewey Reams. I think that's the most accurate translation of the Bible. And what some of the stuff I've read coming through since then, just a word or two change or a comma change or something like that can change the whole complexity of the argument being made. And it's true in history, it's true in religion, it's true in science, all kinds of things.
Well,
In deciding what gets left out and what is included 100 years after the fact. Like one of my favorite history books is by a guy by the name of Packman, and he wrote, um, there was the early history of North America, where Canada begins. It starts right back with not the Battle of the Plains of Abraham, but with the invasion of the British at Fort Louisbourg, fighting the French. That's where it all starts, and the campaigns that flowed from that, and down through the years. And it's a brilliant book. I don't want anybody messing with it because it shows the British and the French for what they were. Okay, and that's what I want to know. Because if I want to know, there's a saying, I don't know if I coined it or not, but I really like, called "If you don't know who you were, you won't know who you are." And that, I think there's a great big lump of truth in that. So when you take books or when you take information and you modify it to meet some kind of modern standard, you may basically make it worthless. Because what is there that it's going to teach you that you otherwise would have learned if you change it because somebody doesn't like a racial epithet that's in it? We don't use we don't go run around calling people racial names anymore. I certainly never did. And I'm sure you fall in the same category. And I think the vast majority of people, even when they didn't recognize them. And look, if that's a lesson we can take from history, fine, but we got to know about it. So if somebody is using racial epithets, they say, look, here's what you're doing. Okay. Look at what's going on in the 1920s, or look what was going on in the 1650s. Okay. Do you really want to go down that road again? And then that's how you learn from history. This whitewashing of all the classics and of all the, look at what the stories that movies portray now. Look at it from a masculine, feminine point of view. Women are more often the heroes now. Men are seen as weak and dependent on the strong women in their lives. They've just completely flipped the social norm on its head. Because if they want to overthrow this patriarchy, and yet what a lot of people don't understand, and I know I'm going down rabbit holes here, but it's the patriarchy that they are railing against that allowed them to be put into the position where they can rail against it. It's like democracy, right? You bitch about the free market economy, and yet it's the free market economy that gives you the tools to be able to bitch about it in the first place. It's the same thing. So you're right. This was not on a topics list, but once in a while, doesn't hurt.
Look, with respect to your reference to the Bible and modern interpretations and modern translations of the Bible, let me tell you what we do with our biblical text, okay?
I didn't want to go there because I don't know, but I'm sure. Go ahead.
We utterly, categorically, emphatically, fanatically do not allow for modern translations of the Torah. The Torah has not been altered. It is never altered. It's not you can get translations, but the real teaching is in the original language. And we even go so far as to when it's read in a synagogue, okay, is that it's read from an actual scroll. And in the scrolls are all handwritten, okay? There's no modern process of typing, and every single Torah scroll has exactly the same language, exactly the same words, spelled exactly the same way. There may be some stylistic differences in the way that some of the letters are written,
right?
But other than that, they're not. And even to the point where if a scroll, when the scribe is writing the Torah on the scroll, he's using ink on a skin, on a lamb skin, okay,
right,
and which doesn't necessarily get it properly absorbed. So what you can actually do is you can actually chip the ink off of the surface of the scroll. When that happens, when they're in the middle of reading and they come across even a letter that is damaged, they're no longer allowed to read from that scroll until it's repaired.
Really?
That's how strict it is.
Wow.
So we don't even go by, modern rewriting and studying the modern rewriting. It's not done. And look, the reason being very straightforward, okay? And that is that you end up in a situation where you are, as you say, Nick, you're not learning the lessons of the past. Why do we want to hide the mistakes that we've made and risk making them again? So this is all part of this modern day idea that we only live in the present, and the future and the past don't really matter that much. We're free agents in the universe, okay? And I just think that's a very unhealthy attitude to take. Nick, we just got to take a very quick break for commercial here. We'll be back in just a couple of minutes here on the Nick and Joe Show. Stay tuned.
Who says you can't turn the clock back? Experience the excitement of open-air flying and see Canada's National Capital Region like you've never seen it before from the open cockpit of a vintage 1930s biplane. Are you up for the adventure? Put on your helmet and goggles and strap yourself in. Book your flight today. Go to OttawaBiplaneAdventures.com. That's OttawaBiplaneAdventures.com. Ottawa Biplane Adventures. The adventure begins here.
Oh my gosh, that was so exciting! I gotta do it again.
Well, that was just a short break. I don't know if it came through. Did you catch that, Nick? That little glitch?
yeah.
I wonder where that started. What caused that? Anyway, I should have warned you that it was when I said it was a short break to
You meant it.
our listeners online, okay, and viewers. I should have warned them. It's a real short break. So, top of the hour, bottom of the hour, we'll have a bit longer, 2 minutes, a little more than 2 minutes. But when we're talking on the 15 and 45 minutes, those are quick breaks, 30 seconds, 60 seconds for commercials. Anyway, yeah, that's the revising history. It's a serious
Really
problem,
bad
and
idea.
and it's I think my greatest concern about all of this, Nick. Okay, and not to sort of flog a dead horse here. I mean, we can beat it and beat it and beat it, but the fact is that once you've said it, how much more is there to analyze in the whole thing?
Right.
I think my greatest concern, though, I have to express is that nobody really knows it's going on. So a lot of the things that we are concerned about are happening under the radar, so to speak. People are very busy with their lives. And even if they're not really struggling to make ends meet, and a whole lot of people these days are, people who are not struggling don't seem to be that interested for the most part. I don't want to overgeneralize, but for the most part, they don't seem to be that interested in, some of these important topics, because it's sort of like, well, it doesn't really bother me that much, and I'm too busy being entertained, or doing whatever it is I do. And that's really troubling because, we live in a democracy, and in a democracy, people rule. The population rules.
Supposed to.
And, a lot of people say they complain, wow, look at everything's going wrong. Look at what Trudeau's doing. Look at what the Liberals are doing. Look what this government is doing or that government. But you get the government that you want. You get the government you vote for. In all of my years of working in the political field and in traveling and in associating and liaising with people who are working in the political field in different countries around the world, I will say something, for better or for worse, I have never come across a country or a society that didn't have the government or the type of government that was perfectly suited or understandable given the society that was being governed. So if we live in a quasi sort of dictatorship, and that's language that you and I have heard. I'm certainly I have, and I'm sure you must have, Nick, in your circles. It's just as much because we allow it to happen, and I may not, and you may not. But the fact is that the number of people that are actually seriously engaged, and I'm not talking working in the political field, but paying attention and voicing their opinions and voting based on their knowledge of what's really happening and what's not happening it's very, very small. And so, we find ourselves in a situation today where, all kinds of things are happening and there's very little that people are willing to do about it. And you don't have to have an insurrection. You don't have to have a revolution or anything like that. But you do have to pay attention, and you do have to be willing to stand up for the principles you believe in.
Apathy will kill a nation just as fast as any invasion. So I think, though, that, and I'm not defending it, I think that apathy is a terrible thing because under the guise of apathy, a lot of bad things happen because people aren't paying attention. They don't care. They unless it happens to me, why would I care about it? Instead of looking at it and say, look, we're all in this together. We're all in the same rowboat. Let's all pull in the oars in the same direction. And, the two contrasting mentalities.
Well,
and
I was going to say, the old saying, right, Nick? I came up to somebody the other day and I said, this country's being killed by people, it's ignorance and apathy. And the response I got was, well, I don't know and I don't care.
That's pretty much exactly right. But part of it, what I was going to say though, is
Sorry, I
part of it's
interrupted you there.
at least I can understand why people tend to be, in general, speaking generally, apathetic. Because if they're not, if they try to engage, there's so many fires going on right now, from economic to social, every aspect, from daily life, the cost of just getting by on a day-to-day basis is exhausting from the point of view of the attention it takes to detail to try to manage the few pennies the government leaves in your pocket to the larger issues like you want to talk about climate change, you want to talk about what's going on the world stage, and say Ukraine as an example. It takes a lot of energy to track this stuff. In the days of, let's take it back 150 years. The government wasn't nearly as big and was a lot easier to keep track of what was going on. And people didn't have to spend, like you and I are hounds when it comes to news hounds when it comes to following what's going on in society. It was a lot easier to do that then. You could take the time to read the paper. Information didn't flow through your doorway at the rate that it flows now. So you could digest what you were reading. You could think about it. And then, at the next election cycle, base your decisions on the information you'd managed to glean about the particular topic. But there's so much of that now that it's hard to do. It's hard. It takes a tremendous effort, almost a heroic effort, in order to do the same thing. Some of us have the time and the energy to do that. And if you've got a family, let's say if you're 25 years old or 30 years old and you've got 3 kids and a wife and a car in the driveway and you're trying to hold down a job, and make ends meet, by the time Friday rolls around, you're spent. And it's unfortunate. And I'm not even going to say it's by design. I think it's just a consequence of, people saying, look, you handle this for me. I got this to worry about, and turn it over to the government. Take a look at social groups as an example, the Lions Club, the Knights of Columbus. You run down the list, whatever one you want to pick. They're having a hard time getting volunteers. And there's 2 reasons for that. One, there's not as many people around of the right age to recruit. Everybody's fishing out of the same bowl for those 20 to 30-year-old people, okay, that they want to recruit into their service organizations or into a whole different other field of occupation. So there's that, but there's also a fatigue about this because it's so taxing trying to stay on top of everything, that people just go, look, man, you know what? I need a break. I need to take some time to restore my sanity. Well, the weekend goes by and you're right back into it again. And by Friday, it's this ongoing repetitive cycle. And I think that is also has to play into the way our democracy is developing. Because if you don't have people paying attention, then the people I was going to pick on Justin Trudeau, but politicians in general, okay, can take advantage of that. And they put a nice little bow on this new law, and they think, isn't it wonderful? And they paint it up, and yet it could be the most insidious thing you've ever read. So, that's at least my take on it.
Well, it's more than just your take. In fact, Margaret Thatcher often said that one of the reasons why she felt that voter turnout was dropping and that there was more voter apathy was precisely because of what you're saying. Although she wasn't talking about just people having to deal with day-to-day life, she was talking about the fact that everything today, because the government has its fingers, or one might even say its tentacles, into virtually every nook and cranny in our lives, that every single decision on every single topic today has a political aspect to it. So right. People are either burned out politically, or alternatively, they're overwhelmed by it and they just turn it off. So this isn't just your theory. It's you're right in line with with the great Lady Margaret, and there is a lot to be said for this. It's, you know, even in our day and age, you know, speaking about the years where we were younger, Nick, things were, politically speaking, far simpler.
Right.
Imagine how it was 100 years ago. Now, I'm not a fan of turning the clock back. I like the fact that we live at this time in our history, and we have all of kinds of incredible modern conveniences, and opportunities available to us that we'd never had before throughout history. So I'm not knocking things, but I am saying that it's not the result of political interference or political planning where we've gotten to this stage. In fact, I would say it's in spite of political interference largely. But
Yeah.
we find ourselves in a time, Nick, where it not only are politicians involving themselves in every aspect of our lives, but they think that they have to, otherwise society will fall apart. Or conversely, we voters, not you and I, but generally speaking, think that they have to, or things won't fall apart. And, you know, I keep on, the two big areas of policy that I keep on harping on in this particular phenomena is education and healthcare. That we have now a generation, multiple generations, that have been raised with the belief that the government must provide education and it must provide health care, and if the government's not doing it, it's not going to happen. So we have voters that believe this sincerely, and we have politicians who believe it sincerely. And it's the perfect storm. So those of us who are on the outside saying, well, just hang on a second, okay? Maybe there's a better way of doing this. I'm not in favor of private health care dogmatically. I'm not in favor of private education dogmatically. But I could see where there ought to be room for private education, and there ought to be room for private health care, and we ought to be respecting and making room within the system for that. And even, I would even go so far as to say that if it turns out that privatization is the best solution, then we should privatize. I'm not interested in following a particular ideological approach to providing a service. I'm just saying that as long as we've decided that we want to have that service, okay, then let's stick with what works. And if it's not working, and clearly our healthcare economics are not working now, then let's not spend all of our time trying to figure out how to preserve what's not working and be open to innovation. Some of that seems to be creeping in now, at least in healthcare. Almost none of it is creeping in on education. And that's really too bad, especially in education, because with education, we're talking about the indoctrination of kids into a single way of thinking. And that, I think, is terrible, because, you know, when we talk about diversity, I think that the only diversity that really matters ultimately is not racial or ethnic or anything like that. It's diversity of thinking, of minds. And in that kind of an atmosphere, you're going to have stupid ideas that are kicked around, but you're going to also have some very good ideas. And so this idea of forcing people into this funnel, if you will, of ideological funnel is ultimately it's destructive, I think, of our society.
So if I hear you right, what you're telling me is that you don't want to put new tires on a car with a blown engine.
No, it's this. If all of a sudden we discovered that rubber was soluble, that is to say that it will dissolve in water,
Right.
okay, putting a better rubber tire on your car is not going to help.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Now I want to ask you a
Wait,
question.
no. Gotta go for a break, Nick. Gotta go for a break.
Okay, I'll save it.
Hold it. Hold on to that. Hold on to that, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be back in a couple of minutes. It will be a 2-minute break this time, so you get a chance to stand up, stretch your legs, refresh your drinks. We'll be back in a couple of minutes here on the Nick and Joe Show.
Ice cream. Give me ice cream with whipped cream. Ice cream. Give me ice cream with whipped cream. Ice cream. A million flavors, let's just do it. Tie me up with ice cream. Sunny days need that cold hit. Ice cream. A million flavors, let's just do it. Tie me up with ice cream. Sunny days need that cold hit. That strawberry chocolate taste. High school vanilla for me. Hundreds and thousands. I need an ice cream island. Give me ice cream with whipped cream. Strawberry sauce. And see my face gleam. I need a wafer on top. Just ice cream full stop. So take me to the pudding shop. Ice cream. A million flavors, let's just do it. Tie me up with ice cream. Sunny days need that cold hit. Ice cream. A million flavors, let's just do it. Tie me up with ice cream. Sunny days need that cold hit. That strawberry chocolate taste.
There is just a feeling that this might be right for us, for you and me. There is just a look I think this might be right for us, for you and me. There is just a feeling that this might be right for us, for you and me. There is just a look I think this might.
There we go. Welcome back to the Nick and Joe Show, folks. We have been having a rather interesting discussion. What? You
Nothing.
just gave me this funny look.
No, I wasn't giving you a funny look. I was Nick. How can I give you a funny look? I'm looking at my camera.
Yeah, but I saw a funny look over mine. Anyway, having
It
said
wasn't
that,
directed at you, Nick. I promise.
okay, well, I don't care. The question I had for you, based on our last conversation, and then we'll move on to another topic, because there are
Sure.
things going on in the world that require discussion. But if you had to pick, because you talked about them both, between a well-run education system or a well-run healthcare system, which one would you pick?
Oh man, that's really putting me on the spot.
Well,
No,
go ahead.
in true Talmudic Jewish fashion, let me answer that question with a question.
I knew you were going to do that.
No, all joking aside, it really depends on what you mean by well run. You see, here's the thing: is I'm not. Of course, I believe in well run, but every time I hear people talk about well run today, they're talking about, well, how would you administer the school system to make it work better? And I'm going, the first thing I would do, actually, and I would probably do this in healthcare, if it was up to me, okay, is I would actually say I'm not interested in a well-run education system. In point of fact, I'm not interested in an education system at all, okay? It's the word system that I have objections to.
Right.
Because system implies one track, one way of doing things. And, we can talk until the cows come home, Nick, about diversity within the system. But the very fact that you're talking about a system, okay, means that all of the pressure and all of the organization and administration all fall within one sort of overall way of doing things. And we may
Right.
try to allow for innovation within that, but the very fact that you're within a single system stifles innovation because you have to tailor that innovation to the system. In other words, if I want to teach a certain way, okay, because I think that students are going to benefit from this, I can't actually do that without approval from the system and support from the system. So I have to go through all of this red tape and this bureaucratic mumbo jumbo before I even get a chance to experiment or innovate. So
So are you
my
suggesting then
what I'm
that we
suggesting is no system. What I'm suggesting is that schools ought to be, in my view, I confess to being radical when it comes to this particular thing, and I'm entitled to be radical because I'm not running for office anymore. But you're asking my opinion. My
yes,
opinion
I
is
am.
that all education should be private, and
Okay, so
let schools compete.
you would go back to the mentality of, I'm not saying the physicality, but the mentality of the one room schoolhouse, where the local community gathers together, puts up a school, hires a teacher with a curriculum that they select, they want their children taught.
Yeah, yes, not. I don't know that I agree with characterizing it as though it's like a one-room schoolhouse. You could have 100 kids, you could have
I,
500
I'm
kids, you
just
have a
using that
thousand kids, and
because
multiple. So, but the compromise, and we don't even have to go that far back in history to see when we had a pretty good hybrid, if I want to use that term, system in public education. That we had public schools, but public schools were controlled by the school boards within the communities
yeah.
where they were operating.
Well, isn't
It's
that
only
pretty much
very
the same
recent that
thing
we've
though?
had this centralization of curricula and funding for the schools
But
where it's
how
at the
is that
provincial
different though,
level.
Joseph? How
Sorry.
is that different than how is that different than the model I laid out? I mean, if you have a publicly funded school board controlled by the local population,
Yeah.
okay, I don't see a huge difference other than where the money comes from, as long as there's no strings attached to it. Like that would be the end of the role of the government. Just provide the money, you guys teach your own kids.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and that's the way it was, and it worked.
That's
The system worked very well, but we didn't have one single central system. We had multiple systems,
precisely.
and But I'm just saying that speaking more as someone who's a little bit more radical than that, I would even say, why do you have to have a central board? Although, as I said, I'm not ideologically committed to one way of doing it or another. I just think that having more diversity and more choice in education
Yeah.
is better for students. It's better for parents. It's better for the kids. And the only way you can have true choice in education, true diversity in education, is by decentralizing. So, I'm open-minded, Nick. I could certainly live with a return to what it was not that long ago, a couple of decades ago.
Yeah.
Um, uh, when you had independent school boards, well, maybe 3 decades ago, where these decisions were being made, and there was a real accountability, and we still have a vestige of that, of course, as you know, in municipal elections, at least here in Ontario, and I'm pretty sure it's this way right across the province. When you voting for your local councillors, for your municipal government, you're also voting for representatives,
Trustees.
parental representatives, and school boards.
Right.
The
I
problem
think
is
you're
that
right.
we elect school board trustees, but they have no decision-making power. They don't get to choose what the curriculum is
So it begs
anymore. They don't really get to choose funding. The bargaining and the payment, how you hire teachers and the salaries you pay, etc., are really controlled centrally, and the curriculum is controlled centrally with an iron fist. And
yes,
and
it is.
that's whether it's a conservative government or a liberal government.
That is also true. It's funny
So
you bring that up because I was having a long and heated debate on Facebook today about a different topic, but the same mentality about the military. And I hold both governments accountable, whether it be liberal or conservative. In this case, on education and the way the model works, compared to what would be a much better system, one that you've outlined. And for generations, it worked in Canada. I think, when I said the idea of the little one-room schoolhouse, that's why I said I don't mean in physicality. We're not going to go around putting up.
You're not
You know,
talking literally. Yeah,
yeah,
I
that's
get
what
it.
I mean.
Yeah.
I don't mean literal one school hub, but the mentality that went with it, where the teacher was accountable to the parents, and the parents were the school board. Maybe that's something we should look at some kind of hybrid. But
And that's the way that our kids went through the education system. We dabbled a little bit in public schools. We weren't happy, and so we put them in private school. And trust me, most private schools, just to be clear about this, in this country, and it's the same way in the United States and the same way in Great Britain, most private schools are not for the rich and famous. Okay? We struggled to pay tuition to our schools for the kids, our children's education. While we continue to pay public school taxes, we paid for our children's education out of our pockets. It was tough, okay, but we made it happen. And the schools were always hard up for money, okay? So when we talk about people think about private schools being very elitist, there are private schools that are like that, and God bless them. That's their right. I'm happy that they do it, and I hope the kids are well served under that system. But for us, private schooling was not elitist by any stretch of the imagination.
well, if you
But I'll tell you
care about-
what, we controlled that. The parents controlled that school. The parents controlled those schools.
and I think you're seeing, well, this is part of the reason why, and again, we're way off some of the topics we had tonight, but this is why you're seeing a rise in things like homeschooling, because parents want control over what their kids are taught. They don't want them exposed to this new woke mentalities, to CRT and all these other things coming down the pike. They don't want them in the presence of drag queens coming into their schools and doing reading time. I'm sorry, that's no place for these kinds of people. I want to
Well,
protect the innocence of children for as long as
and
possible.
and why do we need it? Like, what
We
is
don't. That's the whole point.
It's a pure and simple indoctrination tactic. Okay, it's as simple as that. What there is having people coming in the most outlandish. I mean, we're not just talking about drag queens. We're talking about a parody almost of drag queens in the most outlandish costumes, etc. Where the reader, the drag queen doing the reading, becomes the focus of the group as opposed to the story that they're reading from.
Yeah.
And what is the purpose of that, if not to indoctrinate kids in what? I don't know.
Well, yeah, you're right. We can't read minds. It's best not to assume.
Right.
What's the word I'm looking for? Intent. You can't look at something going on and understand the intent unless you're involved in the actual planning of the event and are part and parcel to what's going on. And then you can understand intent because you're part of it. But from the outside looking in, so yeah, it's a good idea I just look at the consequences. I just look at what happens. And I ask myself, would I want my kids sitting in a classroom with these kinds of people when they're supposed to be learning how to read and add and write?
Yeah. And that's really, we have to go for a break in a second, Nick, but just to put a bow on it, before we go for the break, that's really the problem. It's part of it might be the indoctrination problem, but for me, the real tragedy is, what exactly, when you're teaching kids this woke stuff and the critical race theory and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And in the meantime, what they're not getting, basic scientific education.
There's only so
basic
many minutes in a
maths,
day.
English, geography, history. And that's really what I find the most disturbing about it. Let's take a 60-second commercial break.
Sure.
60 seconds. We'll be back, ladies and gentlemen, here on the Nick and Joe Show. Stay tuned.
We all know that climate change is real. But with countries like China and India failing to do their part, what Canadians need now more than ever is a Made in Canada climate change plan. A real plan that responds to the real-world needs of Canadians. A balanced plan that supports responsible economic growth and strengthens our essential infrastructure. A responsible plan that protects our natural environment and ensures that all Canadians enjoy the blessings of clean air, clean land, and clean water for generations to come. It's time for Canadian politicians to show real leadership in the world, putting partisanship and ideology aside. It's time for a sensible climate plan. We're the International Climate Science Coalition Canada, and we're ready to help. To learn more, visit our website, icsc-canada.com.
And
we
we're
go.
back. And Nick
we
was
are.
just distracted there for a minute.
I was just reading the comments because I don't get a chance during the show, during when you and I are conversing, to go over. And I think we have a new listener. Lisa Wall is in there, and she's making some interesting comments. And I apologize for those of you listening. It's really tough if you, especially if you're trying to stay on topic, to get into some of these comments, because the comment section can generate a life of its own. And it's what I love about our comment section.
And it does.
It does. Absolutely. I love to read, the people in the comment section will start to have conversations with each other. And it has nothing to do with, and a lot of times it has nothing to do. We might start something, you and I, that they pick up on, but then it goes off in a completely different direction. And I love that. That's great.
Yes.
Now, moving on.
Democracy in action.
That you got it. We do not control the direction of this show outside of within the comment section. That's for sure. Now, one of the things going on the international stage, and I have never understood why they think this is something that is worth doing. And I'm not defending the man in the least. Okay, I have always said that Putin is the bad guy because he came over the Ukrainian border guns ablazing. Okay, that doesn't mean I like Ukraine, but Ukraine is a sovereign state and has the right to defend itself. Okay, and so far that's what they've been doing. I don't think Zelensky is anything like a Churchill. I don't put him up on a pedestal. I think he's running his own little fiefdom in there. If you read about some of the things he's been doing even before the war, shutting down free press and eliminating opposition parties, just this guy is there's something wrong with Mr. Zelensky, but that does not mean he does not have the right to defend his nation. Of course, every sovereign nation does, and Russia's the bad guy from that point of view. Okay, now we also have the International Court in The Hague. And let me just find the story. Yes, here it is. The International, they have issued an international arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin. Now, why they bother with this exercise, I have no idea. Do they really think somebody's going to drop in there and put him in handcuffs, throw him on a plane, and bring him to The Hague? Of course not. It's a symbolic exercise at best. It's an exercise in vanity because there's no way this is ever going to play out. No, let me put it to you this way. What if the Kremlin issued an arrest warrant for the leader of, I'm trying to think of a country here, let's say Spain, for lack of a better term here. And do you think that the world community or the Spanish, even just the Spanish government, would stand by and let their leader be carted off to stand trial in Russia? I don't think so. So this kind of stuff to me is, it's like any other law. If you pass a law, or if you have a bylaw, or if you have something, but you're not willing to enforce it, then don't do it. Don't do it. Don't go through the exercise. It's nothing but a bunch of paperwork being shuffled around. It's virtue signaling. We think Putin's a bad guy. He ought to go to jail. Yeah, well, good luck throwing him there because you're not going to get him out of Russia. Okay? The Chinese would, it's just, it's nonsense. It's absolute nonsense when I see this stuff. I don't believe The Hague has the right or the moral authority to pass judgment on other countries. I'm sorry, I just don't. That, especially in the case of democracies, that's for their people to do. You could say that Putin doesn't have a democracy. All right, but the people could rise up in rebellion if they wanted to. Now, it may be a bloody affair. True enough, most revolutions are. Even the American Revolution was a bloody mess. The British Revolution was a bloody mess. The French Revolution, well, we don't need to talk about Madame Guillotine to get to that. So my point is that sometimes overthrowing the person oppressing you has to come from inside the country because they have skin in the game. What skin does the Belgian government or The Hague have in this game?
Well, so let's unpack this a little bit.
Yes, please.
So the first thing is just on that question, the International Criminal Court is a multi-jurisdictional institution. It's not one country. It's several countries that have come together to create this court that was essentially put together to try these kinds of cases. And they have actually done some with small countries. I believe
Yeah,
it was
like
the leader
Serbia.
of Serbia that was arrested and
Right.
charged and then
I
afterwards,
forget his
etc.
name now, but
Okay, but now that's not meant to be a defense. That's just putting into a little bit of context.
right.
It's the situation with this kind of activity, I think, is far more dire than you've presented it, Nick. Historically, and this is why it's so important to have a better sense of history before you start rushing into things, okay? Historically, what this International Criminal Court is trying to do is not new. In fact, this is what we used to do internationally, was that associations of various countries would from time to time say the ruler of this country is breaking these rules. Now, in fairness, in the past, it was kind of around. It was mostly around the succession of the leadership to these countries, who would sit on the throne and who wouldn't sit on the throne, and there would throw in a little bit of religious sectarianism, and it was a potent brew. But we used to have a situation where it was typical for countries to interfere in the governance and the domestic affairs of other countries. That was a typical thing, okay? And they always felt, we could look back on this stuff and say, well, what right do you have to get involved in this because one country is Catholic and the other one becomes Protestant? Why should you be interfering in that country? If they want to become Protestant in that country, then let them be that way. It's a fair point to make, but remember, you have to look at things within the context of the time and the place. And
Right.
in that context, what these countries were doing was perfectly acceptable. In fact, it was the morally, in their minds, correct thing to do. Okay. It led to horrible, horrible wars, ongoing wars. Okay. Not just around religion. Okay. There were wars that were going on about who would succeed, what family would. It was a recipe for ongoing conflict.
Well, that's most of European history.
It is, but these are the things. So eventually, the rulers of these different countries got together, representatives, and they came up with what we call the Westphalian system. The Westphalian system, basically, to boil it down to its most fundamental, most important principle, was countries could no longer or would no longer interfere in the domestic affairs of other countries.
Right.
No matter how right you felt you were, and no matter how wrong you thought that other government was behaving towards its own people, the principle was established: no more interference in the domestic affairs of other countries.
So hands
Okay?
off.
Now I'm simplifying it, but that's the most important thing. And that is something that we lived with. And when you live with that, sometimes you turn your back on things that you say, you know, we really should be intervening. But the reluctance to intervene led to the avoidance. For want of a better way of expressing it, the result was that there were many conflicts, and the suffering that comes along with those conflicts that were avoided. So we're not the International Criminal Court is not a new invention. In fact, what it's doing is it's essentially tearing up the Westphalian system that served, at least in that context, served the peace very well. Okay, it didn't prevent all wars, but it in the context that it brought about, it was a very good principle. And now what we're doing is we're tearing it up arrogantly, cavalierly, in the belief that we are doing something new. This isn't new. This is old. And all you have to do is take a few steps back and forget about the principle that the ICC is trying to hold up here. And I give people the benefit of the doubt. I'm not saying they're wrong in what they would like to see happen. But, and here's the big but, who's going to go in and arrest Putin? And ask yourself this. Forget about the practical question about arresting the president of the Russian Federation, the largest country on the earth, with a nuclear arsenal too big to even imagine. We're going to arrest this man? Okay. Worse yet, if you try to arrest him, okay, what kind of a conflict do you think you're going to precipitate? And even worse than that, okay, when you box them into a corner like that, all right, do you think how flexible do you think the Russians are going to be? You know, here we are talking about how we have to de-escalate the conflict with Ukraine. And we have to get both parties now to sit down and to work out some sort of an amicable settlement to this, where neither side's going to win and neither side is going to lose. Okay? Now we inject into this the idea that, well, Putin's a war criminal and we're going to arrest him and put him on trial. Do you think that he's going to be willing to sit down at the negotiating table now? So, in effect, what you do is, in your pursuit of this moral high plane, you're ignoring the political reality. And the political reality is that sometimes, for the sake of peace, you have to let the other guy go. It's not nice, but it's the real world. And so the implications of this decision are potentially horrendous. It's the wrong thing to do, and the International Criminal Court should not be interfering in international politics. Period. Full stop.
Yeah, I you know what? You just basically really fleshed out the point I was trying to make was if by trying to execute this arrest warrant, you make things worse, then why are you doing it?
Well, even issuing this warrant.
Yeah, because you're right.
Worse.
Now how flexible your point about flexibility of Russia why would they give it any ground at all now? There's no reason for them to, because they think if we do that, then what's the next course? They're thinking down the road. What are the next consequences of that decision going to be?
Now, let's take a break.
Okay.
2 minutes, top of the hour, 2 minutes and a bit. and let's pick the conversation up when we get back. Very important conversation to have. Great points being made here. So we'll be back, ladies and gentlemen, again in a couple of minutes here on the Nick and Joe Show.
I just want to make one comment before we carry on there, Joseph. Lisa made a point. She said, Putin wants war. Okay, fair point. But I don't know that Zelensky doesn't. You know something? I just, from an overall worldview, a lot of people hold him in much higher regard than he deserves. And as ugly as war is, it certainly seems like he's coming out of the PR game on top. And that, for a politician, is a mighty powerful motivator. So I'm not accusing him of anything. I'm just not convinced he's really all that interested in bringing the war to a close. For what reason? Well, I don't know. But when I read that, I thought, yeah, but does Zelensky, let's say if he could push the Russian forces back to the original Ukrainian border, would he stop? Especially with these new offensive weapons he's getting, fighter jets, tanks, things like that. Like, it's nice to have tanks for defense, but they're offensive weapons. So I'm wondering about this.
Well, you know, Nick, it's Ron DeSantis has been widely criticized in conservative circles in America for making the observation a couple of weeks ago that the war between the Ukraine and Russia is really a border dispute that has just gotten out of hand.
Yeah.
And again, without defending the Russians, without defending the decision by Vladimir Putin, you know, and he ultimately is the guy that had to sign off on everything that's happened so far, I would expect. Right. Still, it's still a border dispute, and the Russians reacted badly. But you know, there were just so many angles to this to look at, and you know, when we're talking historically, again, I might point out that the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, okay, seems to be this terrible thing that's happening in history and it's never happened before. Well, it happened in 1956 in Hungary, and it happened in 1968 in Czechoslovakia, and it happened in 1990, I believe it was. It happened actually twice in Poland post World War II, and shall we forget about the Berlin airlift, where the Russians blockaded West Berlin? This was well before the wall went up,
John F. Kennedy.
and preventing trains with supplies and food and trucks and that from going in. And so, we sent the Air Force, and Canadians played a very important role in this, that nobody seems to know about anymore, dropping food supplies into West Berlin for months and months before the Russians finally gave in. But in the
Well, that's
case
where
of
the term-
Czechoslovakia and Hungary and Poland, we did not interfere. We disapproved of it. On the international scene, we isolated the old communist government in the Soviet Union, but we did not intervene militarily because we understood that as wrong as what the Russians were doing, okay, we did not want to risk escalating this and precipitating a wider regional and possibly global conflict with the Russians, and so it worked, and it wasn't pretty, and it was. There's no question that the Czechs and the Hungarians and the Poles suffered because of this.
Right.
But those are free countries today now, except for Czechoslovakia doesn't exist anywhere. It's the Czech Republic and Slovakia. But
Right.
there, without having to have a major conflict. So historically, there is no reason why we must intervene between Ukraine and the Russians. Okay, what the Russians are doing is bad, but sometimes you basically say, this is something that we shouldn't be getting involved with. And the more we plucked up Ukrainian courage, even before the outbreak of hostilities, to a certain extent, we have to ask ourselves how much of our rhetoric precipitated or encouraged the, I don't want to use the word intransigence because it's a negative characteristic here, but it encouraged the inflexibility of the Ukrainians when it came time to, bowing before, as we used to say in the military, a force majeure, right? At some point in time, you have to be able to retreat as well. One last comment, Nick, and then I'm going to shut up for a few minutes for you, okay? There is another historical context to this. Winston Churchill, who was no friend of National Socialist Germany, okay,
No.
went into the Casablanca conference with President Roosevelt, and the whole and Roosevelt towards the end of the conference, at a press conference, made a statement without checking with the British that horrified Winston Churchill, and that was unconditional surrender. Now, there was no question that was the direction that the Churchill government was going anyway. They didn't want to negotiate. They were never going to negotiate with the Nazis. But the minute Roosevelt said publicly unconditional surrender, everybody understood, okay, there was going to be no possibility of a negotiated armistice, peace, or anything like that. Okay, even if they overthrew Hitler, okay, and Churchill understood what that means is that we are going to have to fight this out to the absolute bitter end.
Bitter end.
And
They did.
people don't today do not understand what fighting out that war was to the bitter end, what that was all about. It's not so much that way anymore, but even in the 70s and 80s, when I would travel in Europe, in Germany, okay, like they had not rebuilt some of their cities were just obliterated. Forget about nuclear war. I mean, the cities were obliterated.
Well, look at the firestorms in Hamburg and Cologne.
Sure, and it's
Burned everything to the. They literally turned to ash.
it's funny because you say that because it reminds me of I was watching a documentary on the revitalization and the rebuilding of the city of Cologne actually after the war. And one of the older city planners talked about how said what, in tongue in cheek, of course, that the Nazis all actually did them a favor. Not the Nazis, but the British bombers actually did them a favor by destroying the city center. They were actually able to get rid of all of that stuff that they would have had to throw down and rebuild anyway. So
I'm not sure that's how they would have preferred to do it.
no, I'm sure as well, and of course I'm saying tongue in cheek. But the point is, all of this is, okay. The governments right now are it's as though we're being run by children who have no education in history, whether we're talking about recent history, post World War II, or we're talking
You know what this
about
reminds me of?
older stuff with, as I was saying, the Westphalian system, etc. These are practices that were adopted for very good reasons, and to just tear this modus operandi up and to say we're not doing it anymore because we're so much smarter in that. I don't think it's smart at all. I think it's ignorant, and there's no caution. There's no sense of the risk that they're taking in ignoring these historical realities.
Well, I think what you cued a memory when you said the way we're being governed today is like children. Reminded me of the novel The Lord of the Flies, where you've got a bunch of 12-year-olds trying to run an island. And I think that's how the story goes, if I remember the novel correctly. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. This is part of why it's so important not to forget our history. This is an exact example of why not editing out what happened before to suit modern sensibilities is so vital, because, okay, so we want 12-year-olds. I mean, look at our current leadership here in Canada. A bunch of 12-year-olds, they're fighting over who's on first. It's like the Laurel and Hardy or Abbott and Costello skit. They don't have any idea what they're talking about because they don't have any reference to things that have happened before they got there. It's like everything's brand new and it's a clean sheet and they get to do whatever they want without having any understanding about the foundation they're standing on. And this is what makes it so dangerous. So going back to Putin, what stops him now with this arrest warrant from saying, well, what have I got to lose? Where's that nuclear button? Where's the codes? Why shouldn't I use a tactical nuke? And who knows where it'll go from there? What do I care? Because if they get their hands on me, I'm going to jail anyway, and who knows what'll happen to me there? I'm being a little over the top, but this is this is what happens when you corner people.
Well, Nick, you're not over the top at all. You're not going far enough. Why wouldn't Putin and his small cadre of allies, okay? Why wouldn't the Russians and the Chinese get together, create their own international criminal court, and issue arrest warrants for Joe Biden, the president of the United States?
Well, there'd be a lot of people who probably encourage that.
Because and the argument, but it's seriously, because the argument would be, well, Biden supplied these weapons, and look at this, the Russian civilians who have died. Isn't that a war crime as well? So it's a
really stupid thing to do.
It's a catastrophic move potentially, and when it comes to relations between sovereign nations, you cannot treat it the way you treat a dispute between two neighbors over where the fence is going to go in the backyard.
Yep.
It's crazy.
I couldn't agree anymore. And unless I'm missing my guess, we're almost up against the clock for our next break, are we not?
We are, and so we're going to have a short commercial break. Okay, so stay tuned, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be back in a short bit of time here on the Nick and Joe Show.
Who says you can't turn the clock back? Experience the excitement of open-air flying and see Canada's national capital region like you've never seen it before from the open cockpit of a vintage 1930s biplane. Are you up for the adventure? Put on your helmet and goggles and strap yourself in. Book your flight today. Go to OttawaBiplaneAdventures.com. That's OttawaBiplaneAdventures.com. Ottawa Biplane Adventures. The adventure begins here.
Oh my gosh, that was so exciting! I gotta do it again.
And we're
Yeah,
back.
that was short.
Well, you know, these 30-second spots, right?
All right, well, let's shift gears here. Coming back to what's going on in Canadian politics. My apologies to our American listeners, but they might find this somewhat interesting anyway. Because of all the scandal around Chinese interference in Canadian elections, Justin Trudeau has decided to appoint a rapporteur. Why? First of all, I think that the name is designed to people go, oh, isn't that intellectual? When they're really looking for an investigator, somebody to dig to the bottom of the story and find out what was known and when it was known and why we weren't told about it until the investigator came up with it. Now, the story is, anybody not living under a rock in Canada knows that the person picked was former Governor General, let me get his name exactly right, David Johnston, I believe is who it is. Oh no, that's the COVID story. I got the wrong one up here. Where'd you go? Here it is. Okay. Yeah, David Johnston. That's right. He was the Governor General, but he's also and look, whether you like him or not, he did a respectable job as Governor General, head of the Canadian military. You know, nobody's going to knock him for that. Where he runs into trouble is the fact that he is a longtime family friend of the Trudeaus. He also played a role in, let me read right from the article. David Johnston has a long and distinguished career and as an academic and later as Canada's Governor General. But there are several issues that make him an inappropriate choice for the role of rapporteur. To question his selection to the role is not to undermine his accomplishments. I would agree with that. That's not what we're talking about. It's not that, that he wasn't qualified to be Governor General. In a CTV interview in 2016, Mr. Johnston talked about his close relationship with the Trudeaus and how his kids and the Trudeau brothers bonded while their families had joined ski trips at Mont Tremblant long ago. He spoke of how Justin Trudeau's children now play with his grandchildren and sounded more like a doting uncle or close relative to the Prime Minister than a colleague. That is all fine, and nobody begrudges people from forming close relationships, even amongst statesmen. That close relationship, however, makes it impossible for the people to accept Johnson's lack of bias when it comes to Trudeau and when it comes to the Trudeaus. Okay, this next paragraph is really important. Further, David Johnston serves as a member of the Trudeau Foundation. The Trudeau Foundation is immersed with the Communist Party of China, or the Chinese Communist Party, if I get it right, influence scandal, and recently returned $200,000 it received in donations from an individual tied to Beijing. Once CSIS leaks said the money originated from the CCP. Morris Rosenberg was the head of the Trudeau Foundation when questionable donations were received. Rosenberg was then appointed to report on it in 2019 and 21. Canadian elections were, according to him, found to have no evidence of wrongdoing. Anyway, so not only did he get it wrong the first time, he made the same mistake again. If I was Mr. Johnston, and I'm not, I would have looked at Justin and said, are you out of your mind? What makes you think that people are going to accept any verdict I render? Because it's public record. This is not hard to find out that you and I are close friends. Our families are closely united. I'm involved in your foundation. I am not unbiased. There was a great scene in one of the newer Star Trek um, movies where Spock is trying to deal with the Romulans, an attack on his home planet, and he watches it being destroyed. He has to excuse himself because he is emotionally too tied to the event to be an effective leader. This is exactly the same thing. You now have Mr. Johnson entangling himself in an affair he has no business being involved in, despite his qualifications in a lot of other areas. And Justin Trudeau shows his lack of understanding and his lack of wanting to, if he wanted to restore trust in his government and in the way we do things, Johnson's the last person he would pick. He might even go, why not go to the, I don't know, say the Red Cross or the head of the Swiss government, or find some neutral body outside the country to come in and look at this and bring them in and say, here are the facts, here's all the documentation, tell us what you find. That would have gone far, far further than appointing a close family friend to this position. This is, I think, if this didn't break the back of any chance Justin Trudeau has of continuing to be prime minister after the next election, this one will do it. People are not stupid. Even if they're not paying attention really closely, this stuff is filtering through, and people will not forget this stuff.
Well, Nick, interesting that you bring this topic up because I talked a little bit about this. I've talked a lot about the Chinese thing on my show over the past week or so,
Right.
and I think that the whole investigation into election interference has to be much broader than just the Chinese. Diane Francis wrote an excellent column on this in the Financial Post not earlier this week. I guess it would have been last week, I should say. And where she pointed out that, whatever the Chinese were doing or not doing has a limited effect compared to the kind of interference that we're getting from U.S.-based environmental groups interfering in our elections as well. So, and I thought that was an excellent point. And to the degree that I think that we should be having a broader investigation, I don't think that David Johnston is a bad choice. Having said that, and and then listening to your observations and position, and I'm rethinking that. I don't know David Johnston. I've met him a few times. I know people who are very, very friendly with him, very close to him as well, and his family, and who speak extremely highly of him. What I know of him is that he is, I think, unimpeachable. And I like to believe that, in fact, Trudeau's appointing him to head up this probe is probably a big mistake on Mr. Trudeau's part.
Amen to that.
Hang on just a second. Not because he's going to render a verdict that is friendly to the Trudeau government, but because he may be surprised to discover that David Johnston will render a verdict or observations that is not friendly to the Trudeau government. And I know enough about him to know that when push comes to shove, that's the direction. If that's the direction the evidence takes him, that's probably the direction he's going to go. Now, but having said all of that, the points that you're making are very good points as well. And as I've always said with respect to the integrity of our elections, when it comes to, let's say, voting machines, where I don't think that there's been a massive conspiracy to interfere in elections by manipulating results through voting machines, particularly because we don't use voting machines federally here in Canada. But I'm opposed to using them anyway, because it's not whether or not the election has been interfered with. The integrity, the perception of integrity with our electoral system is as important as the fact of integrity. And the same has to apply in the case of the whoever is heading up this probe into Chinese interference in our elections. The perception of impartiality is as important as the fact of impartiality.
Exactly.
And so the very fact that you can make all of the observations that you've made and that people are questioning the impartiality, perhaps unfairly, of David Johnston probably means that he shouldn't be taking the job. And I regret, again, knowing what I know of the man, I regret that he has been put in a position where he, out of public spiritedness, has accepted the appointment, and in so doing, he is risking tarnishing a reputation that he has painstakingly constructed over the course of a lifetime in academia and in public service. And let's remember, David Johnston became Governor General not on the recommendation of the Liberals, but on the recommendation of the Stephen Harper government.
That's also true. Yeah.
So
now, with that,
it's a dilemma, and it's unfortunate that he has allowed himself to be put into this position.
You know something? I think it's also discussed.
And I think Nick has frozen. I'm not really sure what's going on there. So, okay. So I don't know if you can hear me, Nick, but if you can hear me, it looks like your computer has frozen. So we're just going to have to keep going on here. Yeah, it's you know, the fact of David Johnston is, as I said, his reputation is in my view is unassailable, and as a consequence of that, I believe that whatever the outcome of the probe that he's leading would be, I think the results would be unimpeachable. But unfortunately, what's going to end up happening, I think, is that if he comes back and says, you know, it's not really that bad, that unfortunately people are not going to say, or people are going to say about him, well, you played favorites because you're close friends with the Trudeau family. And we've got Nick back. Welcome back, Nick.
Well, sorry, I kicked the power bar underneath the desk, and the point I was going to make was I find it disgusting that Justin Trudeau would put a man of this integrity in this position. That's number one. Number two, I really think if Justin Trudeau cared at all about the integrity of not only our voting system, but of our overall method of governance, he would choose somebody outside the country. I don't know if you could find somebody, and maybe I'm wrong, but go overseas, go to some uninterested third party and bring them in. That would do far more to reinstill a sense of trust in not only Justin Trudeau, but in the way that we do governance in the first place.
Well, Nick, I have the perfect solution.
Me?
No, yeah, you'll be impartial.
Oh, no. Yeah, hang him!
No. I think what we should do is we should reach out to the International Criminal Court.
Oh, well, I was going to go there, and I wasn't going to the UN either. But what about the president of Iceland, for crying out loud?
Look,
or the head of Denmark. We just have a peace treaty with the head of Denmark. Go there.
Yeah, no, you see, I would be opposed to that because it's a domestic affair, and I don't think we should be interfering in the domestic affairs of other countries, and I don't think anyone should be interfering in our domestic affairs. We have to solve this problem ourselves. I think we have the people to do it. I have rethought over the last couple of days, and especially this evening, listening to your arguments, Nick, I have rethought my view on David Johnston without questioning the man's integrity. I now think that he's probably the wrong person to head up this inquiry, but I'm sure there are people out there in the country, federal court judges, etc., that I think could do an excellent job notwithstanding whatever relation they may or may not have with the governing Liberals, today's governing Liberals, I should say. Nick, we are going to have to go for another break. This will be another longer break of 2 minutes or so. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's an opportunity for you to get up, stretch your legs, refresh your drinks, then rush back for the home stretch of this week's Nick and Joe show. We'll be back in a couple of minutes.
All right.
Home stretch, Nick. Home stretch.
Yes, it is.
Take me out to the ball game.
Hey, listen, I don't know a ball game, but my Leafs played on one of the most frustrating games I have ever watched between Ottawa and Toronto. I don't know why, because Toronto's clearly the better team and no disrespect to Ottawa. I mean, I don't like the Senators, but I don't hate them either. I hate the Boston Bruins. I just don't like the Senators because they're in our conference.
Nick, the answer is very simple. I know why. Because it's past March 15th. It's time for the collapse.
No,
any day now.
I don't think that's going to happen because the Leafs played the Senators. They ended up, it was at one point 4-2. The Senators tied it up 4-4. We went to overtime. We played 5 minutes worth of overtime and neither team could score. Then they went to the shootout and I'm screaming at the TV, why can't you just club them to death 6-2 in regulation and not put me through this? So it went 9 rounds into the shootout. 18 different shooters.
Yeah,
and Toronto finally won it with a guy who hasn't scored in 43 games.
I hate this whole shootout business. I'm just so opposed to it. It's to me, it's just amateur hour.
Well, here's the thing: every advantage is with the shooter. Look, they do it because a lot of people like it, and it goes away. Thank God for the playoffs, and just play until somebody wins. Or after 5 minutes, if you still haven't won in overtime, give each team a point, and be done with it. The shootout is torture. I don't like it at all,
Anyway,
unless we win. But still, like the agony of watching this, like, oh my God. Okay, now please just score. Oh no. Now please save it. Oh, phew. Now please just score. Oh no. 9 rounds of that. It was enough to drive you mad. Anyway,
I
that
just don't know what to say, Nick. All I could say honestly is, yeah, as I already have said, and that is time for the collapse.
ain't gonna happen this year, buddy. Ain't gonna happen. They got too good a team. This is the best team I've ever seen them field. And boy, I'll tell you what, they're a lot of fun to watch. As frustrating as it can be sometimes.
So Nick, just shifting topics here.
Yep. Imagine
Okay,
that.
there's been so much talk the last few weeks with intelligence leaks, etc. And we were just Nick and I were just chatting back and forth in our private chat room while we were on break. And I just want to get one thing off my chest, and then I want to get into a different topic altogether. And that is this. I was looking in the comments by some of our listeners and viewers, and someone mentioned. I'm sorry, I don't recall who it was. Mentioned that that CSIS had possibly been leaking intelligence in order to embarrass Trudeau because they consider him a security threat. And that may be true. And I have to tell you, and I'm not saying this as a Trudeau partisan or a conservative or anything like that. I am appalled that our security services, that they would be so ready to do that kind of thing, even if it's on a certain level what they're saying is true about Trudeau, that they would leak intelligence in order to embarrass the duly elected head of Parliament, of our government. It's wrong from every single angle, I hope that that's not true. I don't want to see it when our allies, our friends, are in government. I don't want to see it when the people that we oppose are in government. The security services serve the government, the civilian government, just like the military does, and the police. And I don't want to see them making independent judgments one way or the other, or being used by the government of the day for domestic political purposes. So
Yeah,
I just wanted to get that off my chest.
I think you're exactly right. Like when you and I took an oath, we also entered under the Secrets Act.
Yeah.
And
And
there's not
Nick, there are a number of things that I participated in,
yeah.
and that you also would have participated in. Okay, even if you weren't, in the upper decks making decisions or whatever, but there are a number of things that you and I are not allowed to discuss, nor would we ever discuss, even to this day. It just appalls me that anybody that in our security services or the military would make those decisions. And let me stress that all things being equal, it may be, to a certain degree, it may even be, you can make an argument that it's the right decision. But in my judgment, in my opinion, it's never the right decision, even if for positive reasons. It's, you are subordinate to the civilian authority, for better or for worse, end of story. If you can't live with that, resign your commission, resign your position, okay? But even then, you still ought to be respecting your commitment to keep things secret that are supposed to be secret.
Well, if you don't abide by that, then your vow, your oath, and your Your oath
Your
becomes
integrity.
yeah, okay. Your integrity is all circumspect's not the right word, but you can switch it on and off. You get the mentality. Well, I'll live with my oath. I'll live under the oath that I took when I joined this particular branch, whether it be the military, the CSIS, the RCMP, whatever it is. Okay, I can leave that on until something comes along I don't like, and then I can turn it off. It's not a switch. This is not a smorgasbord. You either take the oath and you live with it, no matter who's in power, or you, as you put it, you leave. But even then, you're still not allowed to talk about it.
Yeah.
When you and I are no longer in the service yet, we're still bound by the Secrets Act.
So it's you're and there is a certain element of arrogance in this. I did see some news stories where they were referring to some people in CSIS who were leaking intelligence as whistleblowers, and I'm saying, okay, yeah, but that's just too easy. The fact of the matter is that when you're in that position, whether it's in the intelligence services or the military or whatever, you are a cog in the wheel. And you don't have all of the information at your disposal. And as we were talking about earlier in the show, there are times when, you have to accept that from your narrow perspective, what it looks like what's being done is wrong, but in the big picture, okay, over a period of time, it may turn out to have been the right thing. So it may look today like it's the right thing to do, to say we're going to prosecute Vladimir Putin for war crimes.
Right.
Okay. And in fact, war crimes may have been committed. But that's a narrow perspective. And for bigger reasons, I think that I've tried to make the case that, maybe you don't want to prosecute Vladimir Putin. And you certainly don't want to threaten him with prosecution at this point in time in that whole conflict. But I just wanted to get that off my chest.
Okay.
And I want to move on. We don't have a lot of time left in tonight's show, but kind of related how this is the segue, talking about intelligence leaks. So there have been a number of intelligence leaks in the United States, pointing towards the fact that the COVID-19 virus,
Yes,
was in fact a leak from this lab in Wuhan, China. And that was going on for a couple of weeks, and it was starting to get reported, not just on the Fox Newses of the world, etc., but it was starting to seep into the mainstream reporting as well, or legacy media, the old networks and etc. All of the sudden, in the last couple of days, we're hearing now again about it's the possible probability that this virus came from. I've never even heard this term before, but
Raccoon
we're
dogs?
back to the animal markets in Wuhan.
right.
And the term I saw was raccoon dog or dog
Yeah,
raccoon.
yeah.
I don't
I
even know
actually
what
saw
this
a picture
is.
of the creature, and that's exactly what it looks like—a dog or a fox that's marked like a raccoon.
I- s- is there anyone out there that, I guess people believes, there are still people out there that believe that it came from somehow or natural causes or whatever, but I just don't see that the evidence supports that. And I try to wrap my mind around why it's so important to hide the fact that it may have escaped from this lab, unless we're worried the people who are pushing these alternative stories are concerned about liability. Maybe, now that I'm thinking about it and speaking out loud about it, maybe that's exactly what the problem here is, that they're trying to escape any possible civil liability here.
Well, I think they've passed laws against suing, for lack of a better phrase, big pharma about the damages caused by the virus, the vaccines to counter the virus. There's that in place. Maybe there's similar laws that we don't know about, protecting people who are, uh, you know, involved in this. But look, first of all, this whole idea, when I sent you the list of emails tonight about the email tonight about the possible different topics we may talk about tonight, um, I asked the question, is it time? Can we finally call this the Wuhan flu? Whether it came from a lab or a raccoon dog, who cares? But it's time to stop with the nonsense. It's time to stop this, because in my mind, COVID was real. Nobody denies that. Like, it's the same thing with climate change. I don't deny the climate is changing. I just don't think it's our fault. So, in the same vein, I don't deny that COVID is real, but the reaction to it is where I have a problem. And that's been blown way out of proportion. It's time we start reeling that back in.
Okay, and reeling things back in, we're going to go for our last commercial break of the show. Stay with us. It'll only be a short break, so
won't be
don't
long.
go away.
We all know that climate change is real. But with countries like China and India failing to do their part, what Canadians need now more than ever is a Made in Canada climate change plan. A real plan that responds to the real-world needs of Canadians. A balanced plan that supports responsible economic growth and strengthens our essential infrastructure. A responsible plan that protects our natural environment and ensures that all Canadians enjoy the blessings of clean air, clean land, and clean water for generations to come. It's time for Canadian politicians to show real leadership in the world, putting partisanship and ideology aside. It's time for a sensible climate plan. We're the International Climate Science Coalition Canada, and we're ready to help. To learn more, visit our website, icsc-canada.com.
We're just having a little fun in our little backroom chat here. Joseph suggested the name for the flu be coon dog flu. Then he said, too risky. I said, nah. People just think it comes from Georgia.
The coon dog flu.
Redneck fever. Here we come.
I know. Yeah. We're gonna have. I think we should change the format of the show. I think we should go to the same sort of format like the red green show or whatever.
Oh man, can you imagine? You remember the segment? My favorite segment was, if a woman don't find you handsome, she should at least find you handy. And good God, you realize he's tying a fly for fly fishing, right? When he's sitting at his bench there, it's the same fly every week. And all he's doing is this. He's trying to put thread on the head of the fly. I tie flies, so I have some idea what he's doing. But he's not, all he's doing is talking and winding this string forever around the head of this one particular fly. And every time you come back to Handyman Corner, which was the name of the segment, it's the same fly. This thing should be this freaking big. It was a lot of fun. It was funny to watch. Remember, if women don't find you handsome, they should at least find you handy. And I'm thinking, not time flies like that, they won't.
Oh dear, Nick, I'm telling you.
A great Canadian export, that show.
Yeah, that and Trailer Park Boys.
Oh, I was going to say Beachcombers, but Beachcombers was, you know what? I remember it as a kid, and it was funny. I didn't really appreciate it. But since I've been to the coast a couple times and have seen where the is shot, we actually ate in Molly's Reach and could look down on Relic's shack, which is still there on the jetty. All of a sudden, everything just comes alive and you get it, right? If you're ever in BC and you're on the coast, go to Gibson's, BC. That's where it was filmed. And if you're of the right vintage. If you're not, watch a few episodes. It's on YouTube. You can go and find. You don't have to watch a whole bunch of them, although you might. It was innocent. It was fun. It was without political correctness filters built in, and everybody was just being like Bruno Gerussi, the guy who played Nick Adonis, the main character, was a marvelous actor, and the whole crew got along. And some of the stuff that got said in the show was just like, wow, that would never fly today. But Relic, the guy who played the protagonist, was actually a World War II bomber pilot and was nothing like the character he portrayed. He was a very kind and gentle man, willing to do whatever it took to help somebody in his sphere of influence. And apparently, Bruno Gerussi was the same way, who went on to do his own cooking show, Cooking with Bruno, I think is what it was
I don't
called.
remember the name of it, but yeah, I do
Yeah, but
remember he did his
he
own
was a
cooking
big time
show.
chef. Anyway, it was a lot of fun, and the Red Green Show was cast in a similar mold, where it was all innocent. Like one of my favorite episodes is when what was his sidekick's name? Harold came in from being outside at Possum Lodge, and his scarf is froze straight out. He's got an icicle hanging from his nose, and he goes up to Red, and he's like frozen solid. And Red says, "Well, how cold is it out?" And he said, "-60." He said, "Fahrenheit or Celsius? Who cares?" Just the whole, it was just fun. They just let these guys have fun, and it was enjoyable to watch. I miss those days.
And where else, ladies and gentlemen, can you go from international criminal court prosecution of the president
The
of Russia to the
Possum
red
Lodge.
green zone?
Or what was the episode? What was the feature with the show with where
Nick, I have to confess something to you. I never saw it.
you never saw the Red Green Show?
No, I've come
Adventures of Bill, that
across,
was it.
I've come across it. I've come across it, but I've never sat down and watched an entire episode of the Red Green Show.
Oh, you've got to. Adventures with Bill is priceless. There was one where he took a lawnmower. It was an electric lawnmower, and I forget what he did to it, but you see him going this way across the screen, then that way across the screen, and the next thing, all you see is his legs going like this because the thing is taking off on him, and he's hanging on to it. And all you can see at the top of the screen are his feet as if he's still walking on the ground. Oh my God, it was funny. He made an outboard motorboat out of Pepsi bottles. And what's funny is it probably would have worked because each one is its own little package of air. It would have been virtually unsinkable. Or the other one with his duct tape. Here's how to use duct tape. I remember Bill Smith, the guy that played Red Green, doing an interview about having people coming up to him with different ideas on how to use handyman's secret weapon, duct tape. And these four guys came up and said, "We duct taped mittens to the back of a 1981 Chevy Chevette. So when it died, we could keep our hands warm while we pushed it." Like the creativity people came up with was just, that thing was seen in about 50 or 60 countries around the world. I don't even know if Mr. Smith's still alive, but I know his estate's making a bucket full of money on royalties based on the show. It was that good. It really was. And it's where our favorite Ontario politician, Randy Hillier, got the idea for the red and green suspenders, because Red Green would always wear suspenders. Let's see, the left one red, the right one green. That's where the name Red Green came from. It's from the color of his suspenders. Possum Lodge, what a place.
And talking about little bits of trivia that you never knew that you would.
Ned didn't know you needed to know.
You never knew you'd hear it, let alone need it.
Oh man, I got a million of them. But this is the kind of content that isn't made anymore. Like when you look at some of the stuff, when I look at comedy today, you go back to the classics, right? Victor Borga, Abbott and Costello with Who's on First. If that's not the single funniest skit ever written, I don't know what is. And what's really funny is when you watch reaction videos on YouTube to people who have never seen it and watch it. And by the end of it, they're laughing so hard they can't breathe. That's the brilliance of well done comedy. You know, you don't have to be profane. You don't have to be vulgar. You have to be smart. And Abbott and Costello, and before them, Oliver and Hardy. Oliver and Hardy? I got that right?
Laurel
and Hardy. Okay, before them, Laurel and Hardy were masters at slapstick comedy, and the little guy with the mustache. Come on. He did silent film.
Chaplin.
Charlie Chaplin, another one, slapstick humor. in the days when there was no retaking of stunts. If you got it right, then you got it right. If you got it wrong, it went on the film anyway. And there's some really amazing stories about that kind of stuff. So, in a way, I now sound like a bitter old man, but we've lost something because now
Yeah.
what we consider to be funny has to be vulgar, has to be colored in some way. And I don't believe that. I don't think real comedy should be that at all.
Well, Nick, I used to say my wife was doing comedy for a while. She did a lot of Yuck Yucks amateur nights, and when they do the show, there'd be, there might be 10 or 11 or 12 comedians performing in that particular night,
Right.
each one doing a 5 or a 6 minute segment.
Right.
And I would go and sit in the audience when she was doing the show, and she was the only one that was clean, and it took a lot of it. It occurred to me that it takes a lot of effort to come up with comedy that's actually clean, not vulgar, not excessively political, and so you see these comedians out there today that are relying on this kind of stuff, vulgarity, obscenity, or partisan politics. And my opinion is that these people were just very lazy in how they would approach the comedy. But that's the way it is today, and I don't think it's reflective of society per se. I just think it's just a segment of society that laughs at it. Anyway, what are you going to do, Nick?
Well, you're going to go watch Red Skelton. That's what you're going to do, because there
Red
was a
Skelton, The
master-
Honeymooners,
Oh
Jackie
my
Gleason.
God.
Jackie Gleason was a very funny man.
Yeah.
And you watch the late night comedy today with all of the overemphasis on politics today. But I encourage people, go back and watch Johnny Carson. You can get a lot of his stuff on YouTube, or if you want variety shows, the Carol Burnett show.
Oh my
Carol
God.
Burnett was funny.
Tim Conway, Carol Burnett, Harvey Korman. I mean, one of the funniest things ever filmed, according to the Academy that studies this stuff, was an episode of Lucille Ball when she's working in the chocolate factory and the machine gets ahead of her. So she tries to catch up by eating the chocolates. Oh my God. It's absolutely, they consider it to be the funniest thing ever filmed. As far as a comedy show, I think the funniest thing ever filmed for a set was the Abbott and Costello Who's on First. I watch it now and I'm still in stitches. I've seen it 10, 20 times. I'm still, the timing and how do you keep it all straight? Think about that. Think about not only the sense of timing, but knowing your partner well enough to know how to actually present it so it looks like it's a completely natural thing. This has been rehearsed. These people, they learn their lines, and then they got to get the timing right. They have to put get into character for it. This is no small feat. These guys are brilliant.
Okay, I'm just getting conscious of time here, Nick. We're starting to head to the end of the show, so I just want to take a minute, if I may, with your permission and blessing,
Sure.
to just give a pitch for the Joseph Ben-Ami Show, Monday to Thursday, 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. right here on wherever you're getting this, except unless you're watching this on Nick's Facebook page. But go to the website is www.josephbenami.com, all one word without the hyphen. You can get the show live there, streaming, or I'd encourage you to go there and play some of the podcasts from previous shows. But make sure you join live this week as well. We have some very interesting programs, including a good one on climate change coming up. So again, it's josephbenami.com, all one word without the hyphen. And of course, we've had a pretty good show tonight there, Nick. We had a lot of people tuning in, so I'm pleased as punch about that with our time change, or the date change. So, but I want to personally thank everybody that participated in the show in the chat room, and looking forward to getting together again next week.
All right. And with one more parting shot, you got to go watch Mr. Bean and Having Lunch at the Park Bench. That is a modern classic. I love Mr. Bean. His movie sucked, but his series was great. So,
And with that,
with that, we'll see you all again next Sunday evening. I hope you'll join us. In the meantime, have a great week and ubiquitatas et amor Deus ibi est. Good evening. God bless. Don't let anything disturb your peace, and may you have a fair wind and a following sea.